Then on Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the Iowa State Cyclones, team that went 7-6 overall in the 2021 season. Not a bad season for Iowa State, but all this team being 2022. That's what we go over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with their team trends. Iowa State 7-6 last season. They were 4-2 in their first 6 games, 3-4 in their last 7. And this is a team last season going in. I mean, this team was expected to be a dark horse national contender last year, which it sounds crazy now considering this team was a big disappointment in comparison to some of those expectations, as they ended up only getting 7 wins. But I mean, you can see why this team was expected to be super good last season. I mean, with the amount of talent they were returning after 2020, Brock Purdy coming back, Breece Hall coming back defensively, this team was really looking good. Plus, I mean, Matt Campbell has been outstanding for this team. I mean, there's big reason to believe why this team could potentially make a run at the Big 12 or even nationally, but 7-6 was the overall record for this team last season. Kind of disappointed a little bit, but they had a tough start too. I mean, they lost to Iowa in week 2, 17-27. That's a game that they really needed to win there. And they also lost to Baylor a couple of weeks later, 29-31, which turns out Baylor was the future Big 12 champion of the season, which was a huge surprise. Baylor wasn't expected to be hardly an 8 or 9 win team last season, and turns out they were one of the best teams in the nation. I consider them to be a top 5, top 10 team in the nation overall last season. So, and then you beat K-State on the road 33-20. You beat Oklahoma State, which was a huge win, 24-21. Also beat Texas 30-7. But you lost to Clemson in your bowl game 13-20, which Clemson last season really improved over the course of the season. They're a much better team as the season was finishing up versus at the start. And if you think about it, I mean, Clemson and Iowa State there in that bowl game, I mean, going into the 2021 season, that's a matchup that you could have imagined being a New Year's Six bowl matchup at the end of the season. Looking back at the beginning of 2021, but it turns out it was just in a pretty general bowl game. But in the end, Iowa State 7-6 last year. But looking forward to 2022, now your roster preview going to next season, and there are a lot of changes. Brock Purdy's gone, starting quarterback from last season, which has been around with Iowa State for a while. He's played consistently as the starting quarterback since 2018, so 4 full seasons with Iowa State, and 2019 I'd consider to be his best season, as he threw for nearly 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, 9 picks, 66% completion rate. Overall, really solid stats out of him in 2019 and even 2020, or you could say 2018 as well. I mean, his stats weren't bad in either of those seasons. And 2021 was pretty good for him. I mean, it wasn't, I would say, quite on the level that 2019 was, but I mean, he threw for 3,200 yards, 19 touchdowns, 8 picks, and his completion rate really improved in 2021 versus his previous 3 seasons with the Cyclones, as he hit nearly 72%. Which is very impressive. So yeah, Brock Purdy certainly is a quarterback that I don't think really reached his full potential. I mean, after 2019, like he was looking like one of the best quarterbacks potentially in the nation going into 2020. Turns out his 2020 season was good but not great. Same thing with 2021. But nonetheless, he's gone. So Brock Purdy is not going to be the quarterback for this team next season, which will be a change considering he's been around for a couple of years, for 4 years. And Breece Hall is also not coming back, which Breece Hall over the course of his career with Iowa State is such a key impact player. I mean, in 2020 he put up over 1,700 yards and 23 touchdowns, and in 2021 his stats were extremely similar, over 1,700 yards and 23 touchdowns as well. So 23 touchdowns in both seasons and over 1,700 yards as well in both. So it's going to be tough losing him. He was such a key impact player in the backfield there. So backfield is losing a key guy there going to next season. But Brock's coming back, the second running back for this team, which last season he had a little impact, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, but that's nothing in comparison to Breece Hall there. Receiving core, you return Xavier Hutchinson, top in receiving for this team last season, over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns for him. So he's obviously going to be a huge key player for this offense next season. Charlie Collar, Chase Allen, both gone, your second and third receiver from last season. So this team really used their tight ends well. Charlie Collar over 700 yards and 6 touchdowns, and Chase Allen had nearly 300 yards and 2 touchdowns last season. So you lose your second and third in receiving there, but you do return your fourth in receiving and your second wideout, Jalen Noel, who put up just over 250 yards last season. So receiving core loses a couple there, but it is it's huge to have Hutchinson back. I'm not too concerned about the receiving core there, but obviously the backfield and the quarterback situation. I mean, there's a couple of question marks here for this Iowa State football team, especially on the offense going into next season. I mean, it's going to be a younger team next season, that's for sure. I mean, this team was very experienced last year. They had a lot of experience, and I mean, that's why it was a bit of a disappointment, was because of how much experience this team had, and now you're paying for that going into 2022 with a team that isn't going to be anywhere near as talented next season as they were last season. So if you look at the offensive line, you lose 2 on there. Defensively, not too bad. You lose 1 on the defensive line, 2 linebackers, and 1 in the secondary. So defensively, there could be some improvement there, even though the linebacking situation is probably the main concern defensively. But rings of the question, how high is the ceiling for the Cyclones going to next season? Obviously, you got Hunter Deckers, who looks like the lead in the quarterback situation, but he really hasn't had much experience playing for Iowa State. So we'll see how he does going into next season and how that quarterback situation shapes out. But the quarterback situation is certainly going to be a huge question mark, considering there's no huge standout going into next season. I mean, we could be surprised by Hunter Deckers, and I mean, he could have a great season for sure. We've seen that happen, like Peyton Thorne out of Michigan State is a perfect example. I mean, we had seen barely anything out of him, and his expectations were extremely low. And it turns out he had an outstanding season for Michigan State last year, and the Spartans were top 15, top 20 team in the nation last year. So that could definitely happen with Iowa State. But we'll see. Yeah, we'll see how that ages there. But I think the ceiling is still pretty high for this team. I mean, 9 to 10 wins is definitely within reach. I don't see this team being a Big 12 champion next year, but I certainly think this team could be in contention to pull off some big wins going into 2022 here. But your transfer portal and recruiting now going to next season, you lose a lot of players in the transfer portal. You bring in Colby Reeder, linebacker from Delaware, but otherwise you lose a lot of players. You lose Joseph Skates off to Memphis. Young, he's off to Ole Miss. Safety Eric Horn, linebackers off to Florida A&M, and you also lose Detrone Young, Joey Ramos, Kimani King, as well as Corey Suttle. All of them are in the transfer portal. Those 4 there, not quite 2 different schools, but recruiting wise, 39th in the nation, 6th in the Big 12, so not terrible. You got 2 4-stars and 19 3-stars coming for next season. So the recruiting isn't bad, but obviously you're losing a lot of players to the transfer portal and not really bringing in anyone at the same time. Looking at their schedule now going to next season, obviously this is a team they're kind of in a rebuilding phase going to next season, so I'd say the expectations are much lower going into 2022 versus how they were in 2021. You got Southeast Missouri in week 1, pretty easy matchup, and then you go to Iowa, which obviously it's usually a pretty competitive matchup. And Iowa next season, I could see definitely in that 7 to 9 win range. So they'll be a decent team there. Got Ohio coming to town, Baylor as well to start off your conference schedule. Then Kansas on the road, K-State at home, Texas on the road, your bye week, and then Oklahoma at home. Then you got West Virginia at home, Oklahoma State on the road, Texas Tech at home, and then TCU on the road to finish out your season. So for Iowa State next year, how is it going to look? Let's look at September here. Southeast Missouri, easy win. I do think you take care of them by a few touchdowns. Then you go to Iowa, which is a matchup where I definitely think it's winnable for the Cyclones, but I think Iowa next season just simply has more talent. I felt like Iowa State really had a strong chance to knock off the Hawkeyes last season, but in the end, Iowa was the better team in that matchup. But this upcoming season, I'm more comfortable picking Iowa there. Then you got Ohio at home. I'm going to say that's an easy win, and then Baylor at home. I think Baylor next season is going to disappoint a little bit, so I'm going to take Iowa State there to win that matchup against Baylor. Which Bears next season, they were very good in 2021, but they've got a few key losses, and I feel like Baylor's a bit overrated. So I will say Iowa State gets a solid win there. It'll be close, but you do pick up a win there. So you're 3-1 heading into October. Kansas on the road. I'll say that's an easy win. Kansas is always bottom here in the Big 12, but potentially I haven't released my prediction for Kansas quite yet, but there's a chance that Kansas isn't dead last in the Big 12 next season. I could potentially see the Jayhawks being the number 9 team in the Big 12, which could be a big deal for them. I mean, for all we know, Kansas is a team that usually struggles to even get 3 wins in a season, so we'll see what happens. But then you got K-State at home. Also, that's a close win. K-State could be good next year. I could see them potentially 8 to 9 win range, maybe 7 to 9. So they'll be a good team and get a solid win there. And then you lose to Texas on the road, and then you lose to Oklahoma as well. Even though Oklahoma is I'd say a pretty well winnable matchup. That could be a potential game there where you pull off a big upset, but I do think the Sooners beat you in the end. So you're 5-3 heading into November. West Virginia at home. I'm going to say that's a close win. West Virginia next season could be decent, but I do think you beat them. Oklahoma State on the road, tough place to play. I mean, the Cowboys are going to be good once again next season. I can definitely see them winning the conference. I'll say that's a loss. Texas Tech, easy win, which Texas Tech, I think your bottom two in the Big 12 are easily Texas Tech and Kansas. Potentially, though, I mean, as I said before, Kansas might not be last. It might just be Texas Tech. Red Raiders are certainly, it doesn't look good for them going to next season, so I think you take care of them. Then you got TCU on the road. I do think the Horned Frogs, I mean, they got a new head coach, new coaching situation. I don't expect them to be terribly good, but I do think TCU knocks you off in the end in a close one, and that's probably, out of the losses that I predicted for Iowa State, I feel like that TCU game is definitely the most questionable. Definitely the most winnable game there, but you do lose to them. So you're 7-5 next season. I honestly think if you can get 7 wins next season, that is a really good thing, and that really sets you up well for the future. Once again, this team is just much younger going into 2022 versus how they were in 2021. So that lack of experience, especially in the quarterback situation and everything, I think it's going to be tough for Iowa State to have a great season off of that. But I do think 7 wins is definitely possible, and that's where I've got Iowa State at 7-5. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on the Cyclones, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.